The very word secrecy is repugnant to open society, and we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it.
This is Dane Wigington, lead researcher for GeoEngineeringWatch.org and host for Global Alert News. Last week I touched on a multitude of topics that are of dire importance. Importance not just to our way of life, which many people have been taught to believe is somehow carved in stone and will never change. This is simply not reality. And planetary changes are taking place by the day that will radically affect our reality very soon. But stories that are relevant to our very survival on this planet, and those that don't believe that there's any such threat, will very soon be forced to face this rapidly unfolding reality around them. Economic collapse is absolutely imminent. Commodity prices are plummeting now again as they have before the last collapse, but this time around the conditions are much more severe. A number of reasons for that, which I'll go into. The power structure has indeed kept the facade going a very long time with printed central bank money. And most Americans, unfortunately, don't really know how the system works. But if they did, they would be very alarmed at what was happening right now. And I realize a lot of people won't believe a word I'm saying. I'm simply asking them to investigate and keep their eye on the horizon, because changes are coming. Facades, pyramid schemes like that, which is the whole global economy, can't be sustained forever. They've sustained it a lot longer than I thought they would have or could have. But this is largely due to the fact that a lot of people simply don't want to know the truth and would rather go along with the facade as long as possible. But that's an unfortunate choice, because it makes the consequences much more dire. I want to go over a few of the countless environmental catastrophes that are going on around the globe right now. Then we'll get on to the subject of how naive it is to believe your government cares at all about you. In fact, it's much worse than that. The general population needs to face this fact, that those who run the planet at this time see global populations as a rapidly increasing liability. If you think your government cares about you, you need to take an honest reality check. Extreme climate unraveling continues to accelerate around the planet. I realize many people don't believe this also. I'm simply asking you to do legitimate research and not maintain an opinion that's based on a headline or a political figure like Al Gore that none of us like. But because we don't like Al Gore, we can't take the opposite position of anything he's ever said. That doesn't make any sense. If Al Gore said the world was round, should we say it's flat? That doesn't make sense. I don't like Al Gore. Carbon credits are a scam. But again, we have some very serious things unraveling around the globe, and we all need to take a good, hard look at what's going on and to get involved with the fight to change the course we're on, or we're not going to have anything left to save. About the northern hemisphere, there's fires raging around the globe. We're not being told about any of this. Croatia, Alaska, many parts of Canada. There's 50 to 100 fires in Greece right now. Siberia is burning to the ground. The list goes on and on and on. A lot of people have been taught to believe this is just some normal cyclical pattern. What's going on our planet right now is about as normal as it would be like shooting someone in the back of the head and saying they died of natural causes. There's nothing normal about what's going on our planet. There's nothing natural about what's happening. So we need to take this into account. There's a lot of things going on, and we need to take responsibility for that, be aware of it, and try to help be part of the change. What does geoengineering have to do with the fires around the globe? Geoengineering, again, is climate engineering, the deliberate attempt of governments around the globe to engineer the climate. They're creating climate chaos. They're very successful at that. They're contaminating the entire planet. They're successful at that as well. But as far as doing anything beneficial for the populations, That's absolutely not the case. In fact, I would argue that's not their intent at all. It's about power and control, not the common good. Geoengineering contributes to fires in the following ways. Saturating the atmosphere with sprayed particulates creates drought and deluge in certain places, but protracted drought is a common occurrence, an intentionally caused occurrence in many locations. Blistering UV radiation. This is an absolute fact. The UV radiation is off the scale. Take a look at some of the trees around town that are dropping their leaves right now. It's not just drought. These are landscape trees in many cases. Bioavailable metals. There's a mountain of toxic metals, again, falling from the sky. We know this. In Northern California alone, Shasta, Siskiyou counties, we've done 70-plus lab tests. It's an absolutely indisputable fact that, again, a tremendous amount of toxic metal is falling on us. It's changing soil pHs. It's contaminating waters. It's directly related to these programs. We know it's not coming from China. I want to stress that. California Air Resources Board has studied the metals migrating from China, and these metals are not amongst them. In fact, the aerosols from China, I should say, it's not metals coming from China. The only metal that migrates across oceans is mercury. Mercury converts to a gaseous state, so it can migrate much further. So these metals are of local origin. They match the climate engineering patents exactly. They're falling on us. More dry lightning. When you aerosolize the atmosphere with these conductive metal particulates, you get more dry lightning. The atmosphere is more electrically conductive. It's drier because these particulates are desiccants. They absorb moisture. And these metallic particulates are an incendiary dust. It coats the forest foliage and makes it more flammable. All these are facts, all contributing to the fires that are burning down around the globe. And again, are major networks showing us any of this? No. What they're showing us is political theater, the Donald Trump type theater that we see every day on our absolutely abysmal mainstream media. One more environmental issue that we didn't hear about, by the way. You'd think we would see a headline on this. Some of the world's top scientists have just released a study with the latest data stating sea levels are rising 10 times faster than previously predicted. Again, forget your Al Gore conclusions on this. This is absolutely happening around the globe. If you don't believe this now, you will soon. Check places like Miami that's pumping out their streets at about every high tide. And sea rise is not uniform around the globe like some people think. There are many factors with the seafloor terrain and tides that affect sea level rise. It's not uniform. Search this out. Don't believe what I'm saying. Please just do some searching of your own. Turn off Donald Trump and try to get at some real data that's going to affect your life very soon. About the heat and the UV, again, if the sun feels exceptionally intense on your skin, it's not your imagination. The UV radiation is off the scale. How do we know at geoengineeringwatch.org? Because we meter it. We have expensive meters, and even without these meters, look around. Look at the trees in town. Again, not just in Northern California, but this is happening all over the globe. The south-facing or sun-exposed sides of the trees is being fried right off the trees in many cases. Other trees are dead, dying, dropping foliage, leaves or limbs are dying on the trees. Trees are trying to reduce their exposure to this intense radiation. We have peer-reviewed study of whales' backs being sunburnt. We have now, by the way, for those that don't know, the fishing has been shut down in Oregon. Not just the coastal marine fishing, which has been shut down for some time. We never heard about that in the mainstream media, did we? But the freshwater fishing has also been shut down. Again, very intense UV radiation, climate engineering, although their stated purpose is to block some of the sun, it traps a great deal of heat. And with the shredded ozone layer, you have a lot of thermal heat buildup. The streams are warm. Fish are dying. There's bacterial infections now that are ensuing. We have contaminated water. I'm just asking, has anybody heard that, oh, by the way, you can't fish in Oregon now for trout? Nobody's talking about these headlines. We need to start looking at facts fast. So when you see the silvery white skies, which we see almost every morning in Northern California, the undefined, hazy, dirty clouds, skies full of sprayed aerosols is what we're looking at. These are aerosol clouds. And remember, clouds should be white, the sky should be blue. It's what it used to be. Find some old pictures and take a look. And remember that the express goal of climate engineering is to blot out the sun, to fill the atmosphere with these light-scattering particles, to block some of the incoming thermal radiation. Cataclysmic effects, but those in power don't seem to care. So, again, a mountain of toxic metals falling on all of us. Medical statistics are showing exactly what we would expect to see from this. All the human diseases that are related to these metals are going absolutely off the charts. As mentioned before, autism in the last 40 years has gone from 1 in 5,000 to 1 in 47. That's over a 10,000% increase in autism. And now we have one of the most recognized institutions for research on the planet, MIT, stating that in less than 10 years, we will see 1 in 2 children with autism. Alzheimer's, 1 in 3 in the continental U.S. dies with Alzheimer's and or dementia. Not dies from it, but dies with it. All of us are becoming dumber by the day. It's not a joke. It's not a metaphor. It's a fact. Our cognitive ability is being damaged by the toxic particulates we are all inhaling. There's a North State neurologist here in town that I think will be speaking at the event in Reading, which I mentioned last week. We have a big event in Reading, August 14th, with former government scientists, other experts, the David Moore Auditorium. I'll get to more details on that later. You can find flyers on that at Orchard Nutrition, by the way. But a North State neurologist who sees a lot of the local patients is, in his words, extremely alarmed at their lessening cognitive abilities. They can't think clearly. How many people are getting forgetful? Your short-term memory is the first thing to go as your neurological system becomes damaged from air pollution. And now look at the studies we have. And I don't want anybody to believe a word I'm saying. Please just search this out. We're now seeing studies from major institutions stating that particulates in the air appear to be the greatest single causal factor for neurological disease. They don't acknowledge climate engineering, of course. That would be a grave mistake on their part, because the hammer of the government would be lowered on them immediately in countless ways. It's just a fact. This is a story that the government will try to hide as long as they can, but this issue, more than any other issue, affects every single one of us, everything we hold dear. It's the greatest single effect on the future that our children may not have now because of the damage being done by these programs. A lot of sources of human damage to the planet. I'm not trying to ignore that at all. But the greatest single assault on the environment, on us, on the biosphere as a whole, is without question, mathematically, climate engineering. So let's get on to a bigger question that most ask when you discuss an issue of this magnitude. How does our government get away with all this? We're a democracy, after all, right? That's an incredibly naive notion. There's nothing democratic about our government and the way they behave. In fact, a recent study took data from nearly 2,000 public opinion surveys. This data was compared with what people wanted and with what the government actually did. What the study found was distressing, to say the least. The opinions of the bottom 90+% of income earners in America has essentially no impact at all. Zero. So when it feels like your vote doesn't matter, that's only because it doesn't matter. It's never mattered, for a very long time at least, hasn't mattered. The system is rigged from bottom to top. You don't have paperless voting machines in order to ensure accurate results. It's so that you can manipulate the system. And this dog and pony show about Democratic and the Democrats, the Republicans, this is absolutely two sides to the same coin. The entire system is bought, sold, and paid for. So let's think about that for a second. Again, if you ever felt like your opinion didn't matter at all and the government didn't care what you thought, well, you're right. But there's a catch. There's an exception to this. If you're one of the economic elite, your opinion absolutely does matter. If there's one thing that still reliably gets politicians' attention, it's money. Well, the opinions of the bottom 90+% of, again, income earners in America have statistically no significant impact. The studies found that the economic elites, the business interests, and people who can afford lobbyists have a major influence on politics. Why would this be a surprise to any of us? This is how programs like GeoEngineering are carried out. Because the people have no say. Only those at the top who want to keep business as usual or make money, in fact, off climate engineering, which they are doing. We have disaster capitalists making money off these programs as they drought out major areas, and the small-time farmer is droughted into non-existence. His land is purchased in many cases by multinational corporations, part of the global elite. The whole California Air Quality Board attack on the U.S. farmers, or the California farmers, trying to force them to buy equipment that they cannot afford in order to reduce particulate pollution, while at the same time the California Air Resources Board completely ignores a source of particulate pollution that's mathematically perhaps 100,000 times greater than anything the farmer's equipment could ever put out. How can that go on? How can we have poor independent farmers penalized by their diesel equipment that doesn't matter in the bigger picture, and certainly not in comparison to the dumping of particulates into the atmosphere for climate engineering, but yet we have a California organization that is making a scapegoat out of the California farmer? That's an example of the whole system. And I hope our farmers wake up to what's being done, that they're being made a scapegoat for particulate pollution, when climate engineering is, again, mathematically perhaps 100,000 times greater source of particulate pollution than anything their farm equipment could put out. So how could it be that our government, that was designed to function as a representative of democracy, is only good and designed in reality at representing a small fraction of the population, the fraction with the money? Because the laws have been designed to purchase political influence, and the purchasing of that influence is 100% legal. For example, let's say a big bank wants a law that would force taxpayers to bail them out, again, if they repeat the exact same reckless behavior that crashed the global economy in 2008. It's completely legal for our banks to hire a team of lobbyists whose entire job it is to make sure the government gives the bank what it wants. Where's the democracy in this? This is just simply a criminal cabal, is it not? And yet we go on about our lives because it's easier to ignore the problem than to face it. At least it's easier for a while, until we hit the wall, which we're about to do now. So let's carry on. Then those lobbyists can track down members of Congress who regulate banks and help to raise who knows how much money for their re-election campaigns. All perfectly legal for those lobbyists to carry on in this manner, and for those politicians to accept the $1 million jobs at their lobbying firms once they're done with their political career. All legal in our so-called democracy. They can also literally write the language of this new bailout law themselves and then hand it off to politicians that they just bribed and buttered up with campaign money, and again the offer of a lucrative job when their political career is over. And that's all perfectly legal for those politicians to sneak in the lobbyist written language through Congress at the last second. How often does this happen? This is business as usual. It's not about the common good. It's not about the good of the country. It's about the benefit of those in power. And that's all it's about. That's all it's ever been about. And it doesn't matter what political party it is. People should quit falling for this, again, Democrat-Republican nonsense They're just different sides of the same coin. It makes no difference at all. The corruption is absolutely, completely off the rails. The political system is a cancer that is decimating the planet, has destroyed our democracy, and people need to wake up now. The bottom line is this. Our government has no regard or concern whatsoever for the vast majority of its citizens. The population, in fact, is, as I said, it's not only expendable to those in power, but has long since become a liability. We have David Rockefeller saying on the record, 95% of the global population needs to go. Don't believe me? Look it up. But what about our military brothers and sisters, those in power? Certainly, our politicians must care about them, right? After all, without the military, our government wouldn't be able to loot, plunder, and pillage around the globe to try to acquire the resources it needs to increase its wealth. But the notion that our government cares about our military brothers and sisters also couldn't be further from the truth. There's countless examples of this. I want to make this point perfectly clear. Our military has always been used as a tool by those in power for the ultimate purpose of furthering their own gains and their own hold on power. I know this is hard for most Americans to face because they've been trained to think we can do no wrong, that might is right. And this is not true. I'm grateful to live in this country. I'm grateful for those, immensely grateful for those who fought in previous wars and the motive they had to fight. I completely honor our military personnel for those motives, for the commitment, for what they've sacrificed. But we need our military men and women to wake up to the fact that they are literally being used now as a weapon against their own countrymen. And as I stated, many don't want to believe this and will, out of an attempt to try to defend against such an unpleasant truth, will completely reject this reality. But history makes clear this fact. It's absolutely undeniable. Let's go back to, for example, the nuclear testing in World War II. How many of our military brothers and sisters were contaminated with this? How many people have seen the images of soldiers standing in the Nevada desert with goggles on, staring at a nuclear explosion? Can anyone tell me that those in power didn't realize the dangers? Does anybody think that those men were told of those dangers? They weren't told. In fact, they were lied to. They were told, you'll be fine, nothing to worry about. Put your goggles on and go out there and observe this explosion. And we see in some of the films the dust blowing over these soldiers and the shock wave from the bombs going off, and how many of these valiant U.S. military personnel died of that exposure later. We'll never know. We'll never know, because if there's one thing we can be sure of about our government, and all governments, is that they lie. In fact, that's what they're best at, is lying. And those on the inside of that circle of lies somehow think that they're exempt to the consequences of those lies. But that too is a lie. And at this stage, again, the entire ship is going down. Let's move to Agent Orange in Vietnam. Does anybody think that the pilots flying the C-130s or the cargo planes that were dumping that Agent Orange were told, oh, by the way, this will kill your comrades on the ground? Of course not. It's not what they were told. They were told nothing to worry about. It won't hurt your fellow soldiers. It'll just defoliate the trees. Nothing to worry about. Who cares about the indigenous population? Official mortality rate there is in the millions from Agent Orange now. They're still being born with horrible deformations, the birth defects. The Agent Orange is still wreaking havoc in Vietnam. And how many of our own military brothers and sisters did that kill? Our government did that. In fact, why were we in Vietnam? Does anybody even care about that anymore? The Gulf of Tonkin was a complete lie, an absolute false flag lie to start that war. And let's trace that war back to what we discussed last week with Kennedy's assassination. Was Kennedy assassinated because he was not going to go along with that war of aggression? Where do the lies stop? Where do they stop, and when do we face those lies? When do we choose to face reality and start to try to change course? So, in the case of Agent Orange, absolutely just one more of many examples that our government not only doesn't care about its own population, but it doesn't care about its own troops. And let's take a more recent example now. How about the use of depleted uranium as an ammunition? Does anybody know what depleted uranium is? Most people don't. They don't know because, again, we're watching political reruns on TV. The cast of characters is different, but the stories are primarily the same. It's just a cast of clowns, everybody with new promises, meaningless promises, and it's just the most absurd political theater imaginable. So we don't know about Agent Orange or what it did or depleted uranium or what that even is. Depleted uranium is the most heavy metal on the planet. It's used in our own ammunition. For those that remember Gulf War syndrome, some 200,000 of our troops afflicted with Gulf War syndrome. We won't even bring up the indigenous population, like in Vietnam, permanently contaminated with what our country did there. But again, I'm focusing on our own soldiers, which I hold in high regard. I absolutely do. I'll get on to that in a minute as far as how I've shown my regard for our own soldiers. I'll address that in a moment. But depleted uranium, the half-life of this ammunition, once it's used, is 4.5 billion years. Contaminates any area it's used in forever. Absolutely forever. So in the Gulf War, our soldiers weren't told about this. And they were sleeping in, living in, working in areas that were completely contaminated with our own ammunition. And again, I don't want anybody to believe me. Please just look it up. And this is just another case of our military brothers and sisters sacrificed as cannon fodder in order to meet the self-serving agenda of the global power elite. It's not about democracy. It's not about freedom. It's about power. And it's always been about power. And no population has been so completely conditioned and brainwashed, if you will, as the American population. We need to wake up. We absolutely need to wake up. And telling ourselves lies or going along with the lies we've been fed is not the honorable thing to do. The honorable thing to do is to face the truth. That's what a true patriot would do in this equation. That's what someone would do who truly cares about our military brothers and sisters. Who, again, I know a fair amount of former military personnel, and I've had a number of them contact me because of the climate engineering issue, that they know what's going on. I believe I mentioned in last week's show, I've had an Air Force general contact me recently. I know a high-ranking U.S. Army general also trying to deal with this issue, to fight it behind the scenes. There are a tremendous amount of honorable men and women in the U.S. military that need to start looking at the truth and not at the lie, that need to realize what they're being used for, and that their citizens, their fellow American citizens, need them to wake up and face reality. We have no chance as a U.S. citizen. The population of the planet in general has no chance of changing course unless the U.S. military men and women wake up and do the right thing. We have no chance. We have to have their help, or we cannot possibly turn the tide against those in power who don't care about anything but that quest for power. we look at the way our military treats our veterans. Most have heard about this, a bit at least. They're treated abysmally, and this is not new. For anyone who saw Born on the 4th of July, it was a very powerful portrayal of what some of our veterans went through. A very disturbing and sickening portrayal, but nevertheless an accurate portrayal from the historical documentation that I've seen. Why do we forget that? How can we forget that? And how can we claim to honor those military men and women if we do forget that? And go on about our business of football games, tortilla chips, and beer. That's not honoring those men and women. Men and women who gave absolutely everything for this nation. And in many cases are literally being treated like human garbage by their own government. After watching how vets were treated, it's truly amazing to me that anyone is still volunteering to be a part of the military. Because aside from the fact that they're being used for toppling countries in order to pursue resources and more control and to sell arms and so forth, our government is treating our military brothers and sisters with absolute contempt. And we don't pay our men and our brothers and sisters in the military anything remotely close to what they're worth, do we? I can't imagine sacrificing so many years of one's life and not even being regarded for that or even paid properly. We keep sending our best soldiers back to Afghanistan and Iraq again and again and again and again. How much can they take? Psychologically, how much can they take? And let's not even bring up issues like Pat Tillman. For any who don't know who Pat Tillman was, he was a multi-million-dollar pro football player, very honorable, very intelligent man who signed up for the Army after 9/11, who joined the Green Berets. Very intelligent man. And he was so disillusioned with what he found that he began to record what he saw and was likely going to speak out about what he was seeing. And then he was killed. And for those that don't remember, the first story that was told, which was a blatant, glaring lie, was that he was killed by an enemy ambush. Complete lie. Even his family was not told the truth. And I absolutely urge anyone listening to this program, investigate Pat Tillman and look at the truth in that story. It is beyond shocking. He was killed in what appears to be a staged ambush by friendly fire, by those who did not want him to speak out about the truth. He took 3 M16 rounds in the forehead. It's not an accident. And then all his personal belongings were burnt, including his writings were burnt by our own military. Who could think this is an accident? It's not an accident when things like that happen. It's business as usual. So again, we keep sending our best soldiers to tour after tour after tour. And it's not about freedom. It's not about democracy. Anybody who can believe that at this point is not living in reality. Military suicides are at a record pace. Hundreds of thousands of applications for veterans' benefits are hopelessly and completely backlogged. We have homelessness. We have unemployment among vets that's far higher than the general population. The condition of most VA hospitals is an absolute disgrace. And this is thankfully beginning to be publicized. On top of everything else, now the Obama administration has started labeling military veterans as, quote, potential terrorists. I didn't say that incorrectly. This is a quote from the Obama administration. And this should make us furious. Here's our brothers and sisters that have now been used up by the power structure and now are beginning to wake up to that fact, which according to the Obama administration now makes them, quote, potential terrorists. This should make us absolutely outraged. The abuse, the neglect, and outright disrespect that the military vets receive from their own government is absolutely shocking. We owe these men and women a great deal of debt for the service that they have performed for our nation, for our people, in spite of the fact that they've been misused. Their motives, I would argue, in almost all cases, is honorable, and we should honor them for that. But instead, the federal government kicks them to the curb, treats them with absolutely no honor whatsoever. The way a nation treats military vets says a lot about the character of that nation. And right now, the way America treats veterans is absolutely despicable. At the start of the Second Iraq War, there was a candlelight vigil in Reading at the Diesel Horse Bridge, the evening before the start of that war. And I had done a lot of research on the depleted uranium issue and the fact that 200,000 of our soldiers had been contaminated with this ammunition without their knowledge and without their consent, and they weren't receiving treatment for that contamination and the sickness it was causing. And this was a source of great outrage for me, because I feel there's a lot more to being patriotic and supporting our troops than slapping a magnetic sticker on your car that says support the troops. And most people that have put that sticker on their car have never done a damn thing to support our troops, except just play the part. I've never been able to do that. I've always wanted to support our troops. And I went to this candlelight vigil before the start of the Second Iraq War. Again, another false flag, Saddam's weapons of mass destruction, the connection with 9/11, none of which was true. None of which was true. That's absolutely a proven fact. Do people even remember that that was proven false? They don't even remember. But the facts were there to prove that even before the start of the war. So again, I went to this candlelight vigil the night before the Second Iraq War, and I had 2 cases of 100 DVDs, or excuse me, they were VHS tapes, commercial tapes that I paid for out of my own pocket for an internationally award-winning documentary called Hidden Wars of Desert Storm. I would encourage anybody to find a copy of that online or view it online. I think it's viewable there. This is, again, an exceptional documentary about the depleted uranium that our own troops were exposed to and that the government and the media then tried to hide. So I had these 200 copies, 2 cases of 100 each of these commercial DVDs, and I was passing them out to people who attended this candlelight vigil the night before the war. And I began to notice that there were 3 men in different locations. They looked like officers of some type, and indeed they were. They were undercover officers from, I assume, either Homeland Security or one of the other entities like that. They were photographing me from every direction they could get. And there were several cars in the parking lot for this candlelight vigil that had government plates. And that appeared to be these 3 cameramen. They wanted to either intimidate or capture on film any who would protest the start of this new war. And they took extra care to photograph me because I was handing out DVDs, not to undermine support for our troops, but to actually support them, to try to get their story out, a story that deserved to be told. I tried to talk to one of these cameramen that are doing the despicable work of those in power, and he wouldn't say much. I think deep down they know how underhanded their behavior is. But I continue to hand out these DVDs. I encourage anybody to try to find this and watch it. If you truly care about our troops, find it, watch it, consider it. This is what our government is doing. This is the kind of treatment that our troops get. And again, back to everything else that's happening on our planet that our government and our military is involved with, and it's not just our government. I want to state that clearly as well. Governments are generally corrupt in proportion to their size and power. It's just a fact. We have governments around the globe behaving in exactly the same manner, but it happens our government is the most powerful. And where the most power lies, so does the most corruption. So after this event on Reading Dam, or on the Diesel Horse Bridge, I should say, I later went to cross the Shasta Dam. This is perhaps a month after this candlelight vigil where I handed out the DVDs and was photographed. I went to cross the Shasta Dam with a friend who lived on the other side, who routinely went back and forth without trouble. As soon as I was with him, suddenly we couldn't go across. We had to go through all sorts of security. I had to present my driver's license. We had to go to a special booth. Things that this friend had never encountered. Was that the result of the encounter I had on the Diesel Horse Bridge? Because I was handing out DVDs to try to tell the story of our troops that were exposed to something that permanently damaged them without their knowledge or consent? Does that make me unpatriotic? Does that make me some sort of threat to the government because I simply want to put the truth out at my own expense? Again, all this is an awakening for me. I'm not a political-minded person, or I've never been involved politically. I'm not a Democrat. I'm not a Republican. I'm not an activist. I'm just a father who became involved with all these issues when I became aware of the climate engineering that was going on in our skies. And I became aware of that when I moved to Shasta County. And as I've stated in an earlier show, I have a background in renewable energy, and my home is on the cover of the world's largest renewable energy magazine. I live on the east side of Lake Shasta, and when I began to lose massive amounts of power from whatever these aircraft were emitting, and I began to do lab tests, to research geoengineering, and to start to connect all the dots and realize these programs were absolutely going on without public knowledge or consent, and it was contaminating the entire planet. Every breath we take, all the medical stats going through the roof, the environment being poisoned. How do you go on about your life then? How do you just ignore it and go on about your life? I couldn't do that. I couldn't look at my children and do that. And knowing, again, what I knew about what was done to our troops, I couldn't ignore that either. I couldn't ignore that. I worked to rehab Vietnam vets as a volunteer for a considerable length of time, because it broke my heart that these men were blown to bits and then forgotten. And it drove me to tears a number of times with these men who were just twisted shells that couldn't walk, could barely, in a couple cases, could barely speak, and were being ignored by society as a whole. I couldn't ignore that. I absolutely couldn't ignore that. And the memory of this time working with these vets is still burned into my mind. I gave to disabled American veterans for about 20 years. I gave to veterans of foreign wars for about 20 years because I was grateful. I am grateful for all those who sacrificed so much. But why do they deserve this kind of treatment from our government? And why do all of us, as citizens of this great country, deserve to be treated like lab rats with climate engineering experiments that are absolutely positively going on? We have film footage of these tankers spraying at altitude, and I challenge anyone to go to our website, geoengineeringwatch.org, and look at some of the film footage. We have photographs of the nozzles mounted on the pylons behind the jet engines. Please investigate. You can tell yourself this isn't going on, but it is going on. It's absolutely going on. And the consequences are beyond cataclysmic. There is so much happening right now on the planet, so much that we're not being told, that I would compare it to, again, an example I once heard someone make, that right now the human race is like the occupants of a car going 100 miles an hour and 10 feet from impact into the side of a cliff. and they're arguing about what seat they get. And that's about how it is. Because our condition could not be more grave. From every front, the facade is breaking down. It's breaking down by the day. We have to turn off the mainstream media disinformation machine and look for real news. If we do watch mainstream media, again, you have to fill it in with real news. There is a purpose in watching some of the mainstream media stations, and I do make myself watch them because I want to know what people are being fed. I want to know what they're being told so that I have some understanding of why they think the way they do, why they believe what they believe. Because so much in our world is an absolute, total lie. So many people in our population believe so many things because that's what they've been told. Over and over and over again, that's what they've been told. And it's hard to break down our filters. It's very difficult. It's very difficult to change one's programming. And you can think you can think you're looking through a clear lens when you're not. And how many examples of this do we see around the globe? There's about 660 recognized religions on the planet. They can't all be right. I'm not saying which one is or which one isn't. I'm just saying there's a lot of different opinions. People in different countries believe different things. For example, here in America, right now, we're told how aggressive Iran is. But does that really hold up to historical documentation? In fact, it really doesn't. And I'm not condoning, for example, any sort of religious fundamentalism in Iran or any other country, including the U.S. I'm not condoning that at all. I'm not saying I agree with it. I'm just saying know the facts. In the case of Iran, in the last 230 years, they've invaded no one. Zero. Our country's been involved with 50 occupations. 50 in 50 years. 50 in 50 years. I'm only saying, look at the facts. And it's not about agreeing with everything Iran does. I'm not suggesting that. I'm not saying I agree with everything Iran does. Certainly don't agree with everything our country does as well. It just means, how can we have a valid opinion if we don't look at the facts? Supporting our troops, same opinion. To say you support the troops doesn't necessarily mean anything unless you really do support the troops, unless you really have done something to actually support the troops. I have. I try to. And when I go into, in fact, I just went into the recruiting offices in Reading, the Marines, the Navy, the Air Force, the Army. And there are really incredibly cordial, respectful men and women in those offices. And I've always been treated with respect there. And I acknowledge my respect for them because that's what I feel for them. And I introduce an issue to them like the climate engineering issue that I don't blame them for. And I don't necessarily blame our whole military for, other than the fact that there's people in our military that are taking very bad advice from scientists who are being paid by those in power to do something that is absolutely cataclysmic. Those in power pay scientists to give bad advice in order to get honorable people in the military to believe that such programs are somehow necessary or for the common good. Those in power paid scientists to tell military leaders that Agent Orange wouldn't hurt their troops on the ground. Those in power paid scientists to tell our military leaders that depleted uranium wouldn't hurt our troops. We need to wake up. Our brothers and sisters in the military need to wake up. And all of us as citizens of the country, of Shasta County in this case, it's up to us to find out what the truth is in order to share that, in order to be able to understand what's happening on our planet right now, to understand just how dire our situation is, just how immediate it is, and the fact that if we don't change course immediately, we are going to hit the wall so hard the consequences will be total. And this is a mathematical fact, by the way. On the current trajectory with the current species loss, and a lot of reasons for this loss, again, none of which most people are even slightly aware of, but it's 200 to 300 a day. We're losing 200 to 300 species of plant and animal and insect a day. We have environmental collapse around the globe. We have about 36 countries descending into chaos right now. And we have a military machine that has one goal in mind: expand. Expand, expand, expand. How long can you expand a machine of total destruction? And our military is bigger than, I believe, the next 10 to 15 countries combined. Is this all necessary when we have enough nuclear weapons to destroy life on Earth mathematically 12,000 times over? Where does this insanity end? Truly. And where does the American population decide that we all have a responsibility to engage in the fight for the common good? Can't be done by a few people. And I know a lot of people who feel that if someone else is moving the ball up the field, they can sit back down on the bench. In fact, I recently met with an internationally known celebrity who is aware of the climate engineering issue. And I hope that this individual helps us with this cause. I've met with a lot of people who know this is going on. I've had calls from major bankers from New York, from Texas, who made it a point to contact me at geoengineeringwatch.org and express their angst at being sprayed like a lab test animal from the climate engineering programs. They were absolutely beside themselves with angst that these programs are going on. But have they done anything to help in that fight? Nothing. Zero. They've gone on about their lives as if they ignore the problem long enough, it will just go away. It's not going to go away. The treatment of our military brothers and sisters, the abysmal treatment of our military brothers and sisters, is not going to go away. It's up to us to try to take a stand and make the difference. And hiding from the issues that we now face will not save us. It absolutely will not save us. It's imperative that all of us take up the yoke for the common good and start to pull. For decades, military actions around the globe, again, have been the sole purpose for expanding power and control. It's about resources and populations. Everything happening in the Middle East is not about democracy. And by the way, as I mentioned last week, every one of the countries that have been toppled, the governments that have been toppled, every single one was subjected to record drought, destabilizing those populations before the governments were toppled. Is that an accident? It's not an accident. Your own government is spraying you with toxic metals day in, day out, without your knowledge and consent. This is absolute fact. The lab tests prove it. As mentioned last week, we have other peer-reviewed studies now coming in. The bees are a prime example. I hope everybody researches bees, aluminum. And what you'll find, again, another thing you didn't see on mainstream media, is it wasn't just the farm chemicals killing the bees. And we communicated this, as I mentioned, to some of the head bee people in the country, that there had to be a much bigger issue because bees were dying just as fast 1,000 miles into the wilderness. Couldn't have been just the farm chemicals. We knew that. They wouldn't listen. They're still not listening, even with the study that's just been released that shows clearly bees are packed full of aluminum. In fact, the bees are being shown to have 70 times more aluminum than the amount it takes to cause Alzheimer's or dementia in a human. 70 times more. It's a wonder any of the bees are alive. Again, if we care about what's right, we must examine the facts. All the facts, however unpleasant it is. We must wipe the slate of preconception and bias and look through a clear lens. It's imperative. I'll end with this. The Reading event, August 14th at the David Moore Auditorium on Eureka Way. It's a free event to the public, free materials, free commercial DVDs will be there, government experts will be there. Please show up. You can get flyers at Orchard Nutrition. We need everybody to be there in order to get this issue of climate engineering on the radar once and for all. Thank you for your time. We'll cover more breaking dire issues next week. This is Dane Wigington with GeoEngineeringWatch.org.